My guest today is Jasper De More. Jasper is the head of research at Outlier Ventures. Outlier Ventures, of course, one of the world's leading Web3 accelerators, and I think one of the most active Web3 investors as well. Hey, welcome to the show, Jasper.
Thanks, Annie. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you here, Jasper. Look, let's do what we do at the beginning of the show. It would be super cool if you could please introduce yourself. Would love to hear just a little bit of your personal and professional background. Yeah, I guess, what have you been doing in the lead up to joining the team at Outlier?
Yeah, exactly. So I think I'm a traditional case of investment banking, TradFi moving into crypto. So I think the first time I really touched crypto was 2017, the ICO craze. And that was also at the same time when I was on a derivatives equity side, on the sales side. So for me, the very compelling one was tokens as this highly programmable asset. So I looked at it from a financial engineering perspective, like, okay, what can we actually do with these assets? So that really got reeled in, I think, in the DeFi summer, obviously like 2019, 2020. And that's when I found myself on the stock brokerage desk in an American investment bank in London. And then in 21, I actually went in with a pitch for a more formal research position on digital assets. And that's when I moved, I think, last cycle in a more research heavy capacity. So on the sell side, obviously, client base was like hedge funds, venture capital, but more on the institutional adoption, corporate adoption, which gave me a lot of insights of like, okay, how do they actually make decisions around potentially implementing such like innovative technology like DLT? And then ultimately I moved to the complete opposite side of the spectrum in 23, where I had the opportunity to again, start a research team, but now sitting very closely to grassroots innovation. So as you mentioned, we are an accelerator in Web3. Day in, day out, we work with founders that operate around pre-seed to seed. Across a large variety of different verticals. So this can be your DePIN, your DeFi, privacy, a lot of gaming and consumer as well. So we touch basically everything. And within that side, I sit within research. So a lot of my day-to-day is understanding how does the space move? What trends are we seeing? Where do we believe the rubber hits the road? Where can we potentially see adoptions? Is it a flash in the pan? Or is it something structural? Is it a novelty? Or is actually like groundbreaking technology being built here? So forming an opinion around which we build our activity is my responsibility.
Got it. Thank you, Jasper. And I suppose one of the reasons you're here today is we're going to talk a little bit about something you guys have been working on at Outlier. I guess it's called the post-web thesis, isn't it? Which is one way of starting to understand, what Web3 actually is, or what we talk about when we can potentially try and go beyond Web3, start to make sense of it. You guys are doing that better than most. So I wonder if, I don't know, I guess we just dive into it, Jasper, but do you want to just give us a little bit of a background before we kind of start to go through it as to, what you guys are trying to do here with this thesis?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's a very exciting time for us. We generally do this as an accelerator. I think it's part of our role within the space as well. And it's setting North Stars or directions in which we believe the space is going to evolve. We've been doing this for the past decades. And this one is very much our latest North Star in which we think the space will evolve into in the next decades. I think the underlying theme here is the convergence of AI and DLT, which have finally matured and are diffusing across society very rapidly. It's a topic which we've been actively writing about since 2016. But obviously, since then, over the past 8 years, we've seen significant breakthrough in, for example, transformer technology on the AI side, but also meaningful scalability throughput on the DLT side, also the entire infrastructure. So we believe we're now at a very important inflection points where both technologies are very mature, and we're really ready to combine both to basically lead us into a new paradigm of internet. And that's it. So we move away from a decade of Web3 into what we call the post-web.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Jasper. Well, look, let's start to do that then. Maybe we can kind of break this up into sections. To begin with, I suppose it'll be useful just to, of course, set the stage, lay out some context. Would love to get your thoughts, Jasper, on how you would describe the state of Web3 today. Some of the issues, some of the problems, barriers to entry, barriers to adoption. Some of the reasons why perhaps Web3 hasn't quite captured the imaginations or the user base that people thought it might. And I know you guys have articulated very sensible reasons for why that is, and of course some solutions to that, which we'll get to. So yeah, I guess state of Web3 today, barriers to adoption. Yeah, here we are, early 2025. What's going on, Jasper?
Yeah, exactly. I think the best way to describe it is quickly by looking at the past 2 decades and like how we transitioned and actually how we got here in the first place. So if you look at the very early days of the internet, you obviously had the internet protocol on which we then built what we call today the web, right? So it initially was this like clusters of forums, very static walled gardens on which information is distributed. And then obviously like email also became a very prominent way of communicating between one another. But as we moved into obviously like the 2000s, and then with the arrival of the iPhone was a very big moment for the platform economy and like Web 2, what we call today. But as a result, to really like hone the true potential of the internet, we started creating this massive web layer. And in the web layer, for those who are not familiar, like I think you need to imagine all the applications which we use on a daily basis and all the different peripheral code and platforms that are created in order for us to orchestrate socioeconomic activities. So this can be like whatever your large marketplaces, Amazon, eBay, but this can also be like your social platforms like Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook. This is all a code base which is developed around orchestrating socioeconomic activity. And so we've massively inflated this web layer. And then we came into Web 3, which was promised to decentralize a lot of this and give power back to the users around like ownership was the novelty introduced by the introduction of decentralized technology. Now, looking back very critically, 1 decade after, I think, the inception of Web3, which was coined in 2014, Web3 was actually not a revolution of the front end of the web. It was arguably one of the back end. So what we did is we introduced DLT, so distributed ledger technology, on the back ends. But as a result, I think we lost, or we tried to replicate a lot of that web, like a lot of the web layer, which was existing in Web 2 onto Web 3, but it actually doesn't necessarily fit. If you look at the functionality gap, I think we see today between Web 2 and Web 3, while you have a lot of orchestration layers and a lot of abstraction layers, smart wallets, it is still extremely difficult for an average user, if you look at your adoption bell curve, to seamlessly find its way around Web 3. And I think if you would have a very honest questionnaire, even the power users or the ones that are like dabbling into Web 3 on a day-to-day basis, the vast majority of their functionality, they still get out of Web 2. So I think we need to ask ourselves, like, have we truly, like, has Web 3 as like a new internet paradigm truly succeeded? And I think we are struggling against some of the limitations of the complexity of decentralized technology, which is, I think, very normal, because if in Web 2, a lot of the complexity was abstracted away by big tech, who took active decisions for the user. So they aggregate everything and it's extremely cookie cutter and everyone gets the exact same outcome, but at least that complexity is abstracted away. And that's reintroduced in Web 3. And that's why we are where we are today, I think, is because we're struggling to abstract or to make that complexity very digestible for the average user.
Yeah, look, yeah, that's very well said, Jasper. And obviously very, very accurate. And, people who have even just dipped their toes into DeFi or Web3 NFTs with varying degrees of success, you either, take to it like a fish to water and you end up becoming, a native crypto on-chain Web3 power user, however you want to describe it, Or, as is often the case, people just look at this and go, wow, this is way too punishing, way too hard. And there, you've lost another person who is not going to jump into Web3. So as I understand it, though, we should also mention just before we start to talk about, some of the ways that you're reframing Web3 and some of the solutions to these issues, just that, you've published this it's quite a, the thesis that we're talking about here, the post-web thesis. As I understand it, you published 2 of the total of 4 chapters. So the first 2 chapters are out now, and I'll put links in the show notes. But maybe, Jasper, do you want to just quickly direct people to that as well so they can have a look, and then just kind of jump into, I guess, what is next? What is the next paradigm for Web3, and kind of that's where, as I understand it, that's where AI starts to come into the frame. But just quickly tell people where they can go to perhaps digest the first parts of the thesis, Jasper.
Yeah, exactly. So it's either available on the website at outlier.io, or even if you go to the postweb.io, you'll also be directed to the both chapters that are already out. Just to contextualize, so we started off with this idea, and as we were fleshing out, there was this massive scope creep, and obviously we were uncovering so much as we were obviously brainstorming through it and speaking with a lot of founders. Like, we conducted interviews with over 100 founders to compile everything across the entire tech stack of how this flows. But so the first chapter you'll find is the contextualization, what I went over in terms of putting Web3 in the great history, and then also contextualizing where we will go into the next decade. And then the second chapter, I think, is more for the investors, but also the founders in the space, where we go across the entire tech stack. So we go from the agentic layer all the way down to the wallets, the dApps, the DLT, and infrastructure. And we uncover basically the paradigm shifts there, how agents and agentic activity will obviously affect these different pockets. And then going forward, it's a little bit of a moving target, but what we want to come out with is 2 things. Is next up an investment framework. It's how should investors and founders think about the shifts in economic modes? Because obviously, as we enter new paradigms, specific economic modes like network effects, switching costs, brand equity, they all shift on a relative basis. So that's what we want to do next. And then finally, I think we want to come out with the very, very far out vision of if this all falls in place and we really push in the direction of highly automated, trusted activity, outsourced or delegated by agents, what are we ultimately looking at? What is the end state or the mature state of the post? So that's a little bit of the plan. Obviously, we're working at it as we say, as we're speaking today. So,
yeah, got it. And I'll put links, of course, to those websites in the show notes, listeners. All right, so you mentioned AI. AI is a big part of this, and I guess it's fascinating to see AI just begin to potentially revolutionize, obviously, a multitude of industries, but that is certainly the case with all things crypto, and especially, I suppose, Web3. So, talk to us about how you guys see this in terms of the post-web thesis. How does AI begin to make this look like a potentially very exciting place to be over the decade ahead, Jasper?
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at DLT or blockchain as a revolution of the backend, we believe that AI is very much like the revolution of the front end. So we argue that actually we are already in a state beyond Web3, which we're calling the convergence. So that is that active period in which both technologies are converging. And there is already evidence, I think, if you look at the space today, if you look at where the mindshare sits, agents is one, but also decentralized AI, where we talk about decentralized model training, decentralized inferencing, decentralized data economy. So all these things are falling in place. Where we are today, I would say, is the web layer is still to the same extent that as it was today, but AI is augmenting experiences. And that's also already happening in Web 2. If you look at the rapid implementation of Microsoft in their Copilot, Google released a paper on agents. Salesforce has like an agent suite as well. So Web 2 is rapidly evolving with AI, ultimately also setting expectations for users. So it's not only that AI can solve the friction around usability for Web3, but it's also like quite necessary that our space follows suit quite quickly, as the expectations of users around automation, usage of LLMs, like also becomes, like obviously moves super quickly, right? But the argument we make is this entire functionality gap as a result of using decentralized technologies will be completely abstracted away through what we call delegation. So we believe that in the post-web, we've already had read, write, and own. Own was introduced in Web3. And we believe the additional terminology that will be added here is delegation. So the ability to delegate meaningful socioeconomic activity to agents who will then execute in an intent-based fashion whatever we set out to do on the internet. So we believe we are going from today's intention economy, where there's a lot of today's attention economy, where there's a lot of attention grabbing. It's very difficult to actually be very focused and just execute whatever you want. You get sidetracked all the time by different advertisement, attention grabbing. You're moving from the attention economy into the intention economy. So the intention economy is where we express specific intent to agents who will then either execute or execute amongst one another. So there's going to be like a human to agent and then also like a big agent to agent component, as a lot of activity between, for example, you and I gets orchestrated through either our personal agents or a specific service agent. So that entire agent paradigm is, I think, what we are seeing grassroots of today. If you look at obviously what has happened in the space of the past few months with all the different frameworks coming up, I believe there's still a long way to go in terms of like development of these frameworks. And I'm happy to get into why I think some of them fall short of the ultimate promise of agents. But it's very exciting to see smart contracts and probabilistic LLMs being used in one specific sequence to really like automate a lot of this economic activity in a trusted environment. It's no longer this black box on which you have no sense of what's happening. So ultimately, if you ask like, okay, there's also the question of like, okay, why does AI need blockchain in the first place? Because that's also, I feel like the pushback we would get from generalists is, well, AI is such a hot topic. You're just brute forcing that narrative into Web3, which I think is like, for anyone who hasn't looked at the space up close, like is a very fair argument that we're just riding this AI wave. But the reality is, I believe that it's not possible to delegate a lot of economic activity without the ability to verify or specify these models. So verification is what has happened in the past. Can I verify this? And specification is, what is this agent or AI model allowed to do in the future? And that's all possible to unlock through the introduction of blockchain, which serves as this trust layer, right, on which the AI will operate. So that's a little bit in a nutshell what we try to unpack. But obviously there's a lot, right? There's a lot of implications on this claim.
Of course there are. Like, I mean, but let's maybe choose just like a really simple use case here that could potentially be unlocked by AI, future LLMs, whatever. Like you can imagine people that, as you know, crypto adoption from an investment use case continues to grow, and while it's difficult for people to become, you know, full on-chain Web3 power users or DeFi even, let's say, a lot of people do just simply have some Bitcoin, some ETH, some Sol, whatever, some Dogecoin, who knows? They've got some crypto assets just lying around in their wallet. People are buying the ETFs, of course, as well. But you would kind of see that particularly younger generations are going to have, a few $100, maybe a few $1,000, maybe more of various crypto assets in their wallet. But rather than just like letting it sit there idle, they would be very interested in having their agent, look for the best yield opportunities, the best way so that they can perhaps stake their assets or lock them up or do who knows what with them, but, just to get a return on that. So what is needed for them to be able to do that in a simple way where some kind of AI agent is able to do it for them? They would just say to the AI, hey, please investigate the possibilities for what I can do with these assets and come back to me with some options, and then execute on that. How far away are we from that?
I personally think it's very hard to estimate an absolute timeline, but I think out of all the use cases, we are arguably the closest to, I think, financial use cases. I think not only because just generally like agents lend themselves nicely to these type of use cases, but also I think it is a very compelling use case to convince people that agents are an efficient way to like improve their lives. Because it is a very tangible thing, right? If you can increase the yield on your assets by whatever, 2-3% on an annualized basis, people see the net dollar returns of whatever this technology offers, and that will ultimately drive adoption. And then from there, like the dependency on agents in the rest of their lives will become more meaningful. It's very hard to, well, it's not very hard, but it's more difficult to show how the needle moves on more qualitative things, right? For example, like personal assistance around like planning and that sort of like diary planning. Like you have loads of applications in the traditional Web2 space which already help you to some extent. So showing the absolute delta there for an agent can seem like a very difficult thing to do. But yeah, like I fully believe that like on the DeFi side, you already have this trend, obviously, like DeFi with like it's a wordplay on decentralized finance, but obviously the two last ones is the A and the I. And it's again this idea where rather than going through a very tedious process of finding the most lucrative potential liquidity pools or an outcome which offers you the highest yield, there's a degree of automation. I think ultimately today, I think we need to be very critical that it is slightly lower, and some of the solutions are not the most elegant ones. Like a lot of the time there's like vault structures and all this stuff, which then create honeypots for potential black hat hackers. But yeah, I think that's the future. And on the take rate, I think I'm a big believer that we are going into an era of what I call hyper financialization. I think the education and technology and the combination of that will just create a very big appetite for people to squeeze yield out of basically any asset, and tie that into an environment where we see globally just a higher debasing than before. Like again, we're going into this inflationary environment. It's very punishing to have idle assets. So there will be an appetite, I think, to squeeze yield out of any asset. And then there's a very strong market fit where you can just automate a lot of this stuff, and you don't need to go onto like a massive learning curve to know how to whatever, like navigate all the different LPs and use the different pools. So yeah, I think that's I think a very exciting use case, to be honest.
Yeah, I think, I can totally see it happening. There's nothing that motivates people more than money. Obviously, Chapsy, you know that. And I think it'd be the same. You can kind of imagine it coming from the bank side as well. Once some of the banks can kind of see that they can potentially, have their customers use their crypto assets to access some of these massive liquidity pools around the world, they'll want a piece of that pie as well. And just, I think won't happen overnight, but gradually, and then suddenly, who knows? That's what they say. As we start to finish off this kind of part of the podcast, Jasper, just again, so if we're moving from Web3 to the post-Web, I know that, I think you said chapter 2 is more on the tech stack, which is a little bit more technical, a little bit more nuanced, but just run us through just some kind of your high level overview of what you guys mean by the core idea of the post web, and what you mean by the post web tech stack, how this is beginning to play out?
Yeah, it's I think it's a super interesting one. It's also by a large shot, the largest chapter so far. I think it's going to be the largest. So I think if we go across the tech stack, the most obvious early on thing you will see is that we believe I think it's very important to state that what we have built as a collective over the past decades is the best possible stack to host agents on. It's, I think it has huge potential, the Web3 stack, with minor optimizations and shifts. It lends itself very well to agents. So I think this is important to say. It's not as if we are ditching the Web3 stack and moving on to something completely new. Actually, in retrospect, a lot of the pockets and things we built today are just perfect for agentic systems to be hosted on. But the biggest difference between a Web3 and then post-Web stack is obviously the introduction of the agentic layer and decentralized AI, which revolve around like model training, decentralized inferencing, and obviously like agent marketplaces. So how will you and I interact with an agent? I think is a very important question we need to ask ourselves around like, okay, how do we orchestrate this? But then if we move down the tech stack, all the way from top to bottom, I think a big difference as well is we believe a lot of the UX UI will be rendered almost meaningless in the future, where we look at this versus like very basic tasks and more immersive tasks, but the more commoditized day-to-day, for example, you and I need to settle a payment. There's no need for us in the post-web to have any meaningful UX UI on that. It is through intent expressed to our agent in whatever interface that might come, either it's voice, either it's text, and that activity is just executed very automatically. The reason why we believe there's still UX UI is when you talk about immersive experiences. And then I think you feed again into this idea of like virtual reality, metaverse, anything that's meaningful, maybe the gaming realm, like that's where you still need UX UI. Moving down that stack, I think, for example, we explain everything in a huge amount of detail. I'm very happy to like jump across the entire stack. Something I think is hugely underappreciated in the post-web is, for example, the role of wallets. I think wallets are vastly underestimated. A lot of people see them today as just some plugin in which their like keys happen to be stored. But if a lot of economic activity is hosted on chain, wallet will have a hugely important role, not only in keeping the assets, the crypto assets which we have today, but also RWA. So your real world assets will be reflected in your wallet. And then an even bigger part, I think, is your personhood. So parts of your identity, parts of your financial data. And then there's going to be a huge overlay around consent. That's, I think, the critical part here is we as users, as end users, need to be able to provide layers of consent, hyper-tailored around what can agents do, what can they not do. And like allowing some kind of like barrier or like finite amount of space in which these agents can operate is going to be very critical in order to ensure that it's trusted by the users, right? Then that we can go into stable coins, programmable money for exclusively agents and all these things. Like we unpack, I think, the entire stack. So maybe for anyone that's listening, like if you're a builder within a specific area, I'm pretty sure you'll find some interesting things of our views and like how everything is about to change over the next few years.
Very much so. And when do the next two chapters drop, Jasper?
It's a good question, and I don't want to pressure myself into this, but I think it's going to be early March is chapter 3. And then I think chapter 4 will follow suit very quickly. So it's going to be, I think the entire thing will be written by early April latest. So then we'll bundle everything together. Today we're looking at, I think we're a little bit over 200 pages. So let's say like 400 pages, give or take. So it should be a good summer holiday reading for anyone that's catching up on stuff.
Yeah, and as much as it's great to hear Jasper and I talk through some of this stuff, obviously the thesis, folks, is full of interesting charts and images, graphics, thoughts, quotes, interviews, and so on. So there's just a a wealth of information to dive into just on the two parts of the post-web thesis there. I reckon, Jasper, we start to finish up the podcast. And of course, we do that, though, by running you through the very famous Crypto Conversation hot take round. Are you up for it?
Yes, let's do it.
Let's do it, Jasper. I'm just going to run some questions at you. I just want you to give me your honest hot take style answers, if you like. Question one for you, a bit of a funny one, but let's see what you have to say. Jasper, where would you say that you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-chain opportunist spectrum?
It's a very difficult one. I think I'm more on the multi-chain side of things. I think modularity will be hugely important in the future.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. What would you say, Jasper, is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
This is a difficult one. Firmest conviction is I believe we're at almost 20% adoption, and the next 5 years will be very much where we will see the watershed moment, which drives us to 80%.
Yeah, very nice. All right. Bill Gates said that we tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. 10 years is a long time. The post-web, what does it look like in 10 years, Jasper?
I'm very well aware of Amara's law. I believe that's why we took the horizon of 10 years, but I believe it's very plausible, judging by different voices we've spoken to either in the industry or on the academic side. I think we're well on track.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's another way to think about it. You know, William Gibson famously said that the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed, Jasper. With that in mind, what's an example of the future being here right now, but most people aren't aware of it?
I genuinely believe it's on the consumer side, the AI. I think it's extremely underexplored. I think a lot of people still don't touch it enough and feel like they just use a Google prompt, they push it into LLM, and they feel like it's life-changing. That is the novelty. Like the true acceleration in productivity is right in front of us. We're just not using it.
Yeah, look, I tend to agree. I think anyone that's really using the LLMs at the moment and using it on a slightly more sophisticated way, whether it's to leverage what they're able to do in their work life, but also their personal life, just day to day. It's fascinating just what they can achieve at the moment, and scary to think that, you know, whatever is available now is going to be seen as reasonably primitive in just like 2 years' time, probably.
Exactly.
All right, let's start to finish off. Jasper, the final question for you is, what would you say is your favorite science fiction book, film, or TV show?
I've been recently getting into science fiction again. I'm going with a classic, like the Lord of the Rings trilogy is extremely hard to beat, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantasy classic, Lord of the Rings, a great selection, Jasper. Look, it's been excellent talking to you today. Thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some insights from the Outlier Ventures post-web thesis. Parts 1 and 2 are published now. Links are in the show notes, folks. But yeah, again, Jasper, just to take us out, tell people where they can go to, dive into the wealth of information that you guys have published so far.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks. So, it's postweb.io. You'll go directly to the landing page there, or outlierventures.io is where you can find the programs we have live, all the information, and then obviously socials, which is very easy, like your X, your LinkedIn. I think that's also where we distribute a lot of our insights on a daily basis, actually.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jasper. All the best, and bye for now.
Thanks, Annie.